Hey, what's up guys, it's Luke Amenity and welcome to the video. Since LMS is getting more popular again, I figured I'd upload the episode 2 of the Inside the Mind of Amenity video. Just kind of explaining what goes through my head during fights, and maybe if you guys want to, use some of that, then go for it. So when I spawned in here, the first thing I noticed was that I was within melee distance of this guy, so I knew right away that I was going to melee him. That's honestly one of the biggest mistakes I see with people in these type of like Outlast fights, is they wait way too long to use their specs. Using a spec early in a fight does a few things. The first thing it does is if you get a good enough hit, obviously you'll gain momentum, which will give you the upper hand in a fight early. Allow you to hit your opponent without them being able to hit you back because they're busy eating. It also could allow for you to get another spec at the very end of a fight if a fight does take a long amount of time to where your spec is regenning during the fight. So kind of like a rule that I have for myself is every single time that I'm unfrozen, I'll either spec my opponent with a melee weapon, I'll hit them with a melee weapon, or I'll run at them with a melee weapon to get them to pray melee, and then I'll range them, just depending on how far away I am from them initially. So in this fight, you can see after I bolt this guy, I actually pull up my claws and run at him. You can tell a lot based on a player on how they react just to one prey switch of a melee weapon like Flash. Basically, I'm just kind of paying attention to one, if he switches to melee prey at all, and two, how fast of a melee prey it is. If it's a quick melee prey, but then he realizes it's a fakie and then right back to range, I know that it's a better player. If they don't pray melee at all, then I know that it's going to be easy to hit them off prayer with melee in the fight and I'll kill them easily. So because this guy knew what he was doing, I did this fakie where I pretend like I'm running away and I run back in with claws on him. This works really well against good players. Good players sense movement away from them as kind of like safety. And the reason this works so well is because visually your character is actually 2 or 3 squares behind where your character actually is in the game. So you can see me click away from him, and then you can see me click back towards him, and it looks like I claw him from like 4 or 5 squares away, but technically from the game sense, my character is within melee distance of him. And then just understand the power of being able to one-tick from certain weapons. So I know I have a crossbow, but I know I have also a Staff of the Dead. I can one-tick from the Staff of the Dead, but not the crossbow. Understand that if you're going to go in for a melee spec, make sure you do it from a one-tick weapon. Don't just hold out the claws, and run at them. It's going to be way too obvious. So here's another clip that kind of showcases movement well. So I'm just about to get unfrozen here. Like, I think that's 3 seconds on the timer or something. But recognize your timer, guys. Like right now I'm unfrozen. I should be mailing him. Yep, I melee him right there with the Elder Maul. And then I run away, click underneath him to run back. And I don't just switch into my Elder Maul, I also switch into my Mystic Bottoms because I realized that he had his Mage Gear and was going to try to freeze me. Notice as well that when I notice movement from him, even though he didn't show signs of like coming in to spec me, I still prayed melee. Now, why would I do that, right? Like, what's the point of that? Well, the reason being is you're playing a numbers game, right? Basically, I'm looking at this scenario from the standpoint like, if I do get spec'd, I'm guessing this guy has both his specs left. If I do get spec'd and take damage, an off-prey melee spec is gonna do more damage than, say, a ballista off-prayer on my tank gear. It's prey switches like these that if you're just watching the fight from a viewer standpoint, you don't really notice it as like being that big of a deal, but it is a major contributing factor to winning fights. You guys who play LMS have probably noticed that when you're fighting someone good, it's really hard to hit them off prayer with a melee spec. And the reason being is they're very good at watching the movement of the other player, and they're very good at predicting when that spec's gonna come, when the opponent is unfrozen, and they know what weapons are a possible one-tick spec from. So here yet again is another movement clip. I got that guy off prayer with the claws there. And it's pretty, after a claws, it's pretty much a guaranteed like ballista off hit unless like they're kind of like a good player and they're taking a risk at the same time. And notice that just because I'm like paying attention to my own switches and my own, fakies and stuff, I'm also paying attention to what he has. Like he has claws out. I knew that he was still frozen like about 5 or 6 seconds, so he wasn't able to like actually reach me, but I knew that if I went in for my spec, he would be able to, spec me back at the same time. So I don't really know what I'm trying to get at, but like maybe just like I guess just don't get super tunnel visioned on your own specs and your own switches. Like, you still have to pay attention to what the opponent is doing. So here's a good example of that. After I bolt this guy, I notice that he's putting on his mystic gear at the same time. So as I'm putting on my mystic gear, I make it a point to get my mage prayer on. And then furthermore, when I go in for my DDS spec, I make sure to put my mystic bottom on for more magic defense. And you'll notice the tick that my mystic bottom went on is the tick that he casted his mage. So there is a good chance that the only reason I was able to melee him there and not get frozen was because of my mystic bottom. And since I was one step from my opponent, or I don't know if that's even a term, I say one step, but like that's what I mean when I'm right next to my opponent. But since I was one step with him, I knew that, like, you know, meleeing was a possibility. So I was really paying attention to what he was holding on in his hands, like if it's a melee weapon or not. Or if he did any kind of pot trick, I would probably pray melee there as well, not knowing if he was only like drinking a range pot or if he was going in for a spec. Here's another big thing, guys. Learn the tick speed of the weapon you're using. So obviously my setup here is I have the Staff of the Dead with a ballista. There's a few reasons why learning the tick speed of your weapon is so important. The first reason why it's so important is because you want to spend as much time in a fight as you can in your tank gear. So your tank gear is obviously, you know, tank top, tank bottom, holding out your staff, holding out your shield. So if I'm trying to ballista him on a tick where I can't ballista him, I don't have my shield and my staff on. I'm missing out on range and melee defense from the shield, and I'm missing out on magic defense from the staff. The second reason should be a bit more obvious. You don't want to show your opponent what weapon you're using, what you're going to attack with. So if you just ballista someone and you know that you're not going to be able to ballista them for another, you know, few ticks because it's such a slow weapon, then why would you sit there with your ballista out, like just spam clicking them, wasting not only valuable time that you could be using for your own protection prayers because your cursors in the middle of the screen, but also just making it abundantly obvious on what attack you're going to use, which just makes it easier for your opponent to block. LMS is probably the best place to learn this, but just try to spend as much time as you can in a fight, like in your tank gear, and just kind of know, like, oh, if I click my rune crossbow here and then click them in the same tick, it goes off and then I can put my staff right back on. And I never actually sat there and held my crossbow out before I attacked them. So after I ballisted this guy here, like a decent hit, yeah, 220 XP drop, why would I waste time like faking? He knows I'm not gonna be able to attack him. I know, like, I'm not gonna be able to attack him. So all I did was I patiently waited. I used that time for my own defensive prayers because I knew that I wasn't gonna be able to attack him in between those ballista hits. So here's an example of me using movement to force overhead pray switches. I right click, walk under, and move at him, which causes him to melee prayer. And then when he freezes me here, I know that I missed that prayer, but I still pray mage. And what I do is I pray mage and then I hover over range prayer, like really paying attention to what he's using. The reason I prayed mage there is I kind of like forced his next attack to be range because he's going to be looking at my overheads and seeing, oh, like he prayed mage, I'm going to range him next. But then I'm going to change to my range prayer at the last available tick to actually block his range attack. So using my own like overhead prayers, I'm kind of like baiting him into attacking me with the attack style that I actually want him to attack me with. I think I mentioned this in the first Inside the Mind of Amenity video, but so many people are so like dead set on freezing you. I don't get it. Unless your opponent is using you being frozen as like a huge advantage, like say they have you around a tree or like a DD or something, you don't have to freeze them. It doesn't make any sense to freeze them. People just set out in their mystic gear and they just like constantly try to freeze people. I see it all the time. Like they're just wasting attacks. If anything, that's the best time to bolt someone back because they're gonna be thinking like, oh, this guy's trying to freeze me because I'm unfrozen and he's frozen. But in reality, you can just bolt them back like off prayer over and over again. And I think I touched on this earlier in the video, but whenever you are unfrozen, guys, the second you get unfrozen, either one, spec them with a melee weapon, 2, hit them with a melee weapon like with a whip or something, the one that you're not necessarily going to spec with, or 3, if you're far away from them, run at them with a melee weapon, and then right before you are about to hit them, then range them because they'll be praying melee, right? Too many people are just like totally get specced off prayer every single time by a melee weapon. Like this guy like missed pretty much all my DDSs and everything. Remember, this is called tribriding. You have melee to use. Freaking use it, bro. Like way too many people just use range and mage and they just get refrozen in the same spot, and like their movement is so stagnant compared to good players. It literally is the difference between like twice your DPS, like being able to just use your melee weapon a lot during a fight. Where you're gonna get a lot of your DPS, especially when you're close, is from the melee weapons. Don't be afraid to use them a lot.